Jake Morrison never thought he would end up in space. He was just a normal guy from Ohio who liked fixing things and solving problems. But somehow he got a job working for the Earth diplomatic team. Now he was on a huge alien spaceship, trying not to get lost in the endless hallways that all looked the same. The ship belonged to the Valtorians, one of the most powerful alien races in the galaxy. Everything about them was impressive and a little scary. They were tall, with smooth gray skin that seemed to shimmer under the lights. They moved with perfect grace and spoke in voices that sounded like music. But there was something cold about them, something that made Jake feel uneasy. The humans had been on the ship for 3 days, trying to work out a trade deal. Jake's job was simple: keep track of documents, make sure everyone had what they needed, and stay out of the way. He was good at that. He had spent most of his life being the person who fixed things quietly in the background. On the third night, there was a big formal dinner. All the important people were there, wearing their best clothes and trying to look confident. Jake wore his only good suit and stood near the back of the room. The Valtorian queen, Zarathi, sat on a throne that seemed to be made of crystal and light. She looked powerful and distant, like a statue more than a person. Halfway through the dinner, Jake's boss came over looking worried. He had forgotten an important data tablet back in the human quarters. It had all the trade numbers they needed for tomorrow's meeting. Someone had to go get it, and since Jake was the least important person in the room, that someone was him. Jake didn't mind. The dinner was boring anyway, and he was tired of standing around pretending to understand what people were talking about. He took the translator device his boss handed him and headed out into the corridor. That was when things started to go wrong. The hallways on the Valtorian ship were made of some kind of translucent material that glowed softly. They all looked exactly the same, with no signs or markers that Jake could read. He had been trying to memorize the route, but after a few turns he realized he wasn't sure which way to go. Then the translator device made a strange buzzing sound and went dark. Jake hit it a few times, hoping it would come back on, but nothing happened. Great. Now he was lost and couldn't even ask for directions. He kept walking, hoping he would recognize something. The ship was quiet. Most of the crew must have been at the dinner or sleeping. Jake turned left, then right, then left again. He was completely lost now. Finally, he saw a door that looked different from the others. It had strange symbols on it that glowed brighter than the walls. Maybe someone behind that door could help him. Jake pressed his hand against the panel beside the door, hoping it would open. To his surprise, it did. The door slid open with a soft sound. Jake stepped inside, already starting to say that he was lost and needed help. But the words died in his throat when he saw what was in the room. It was a bedroom, but not like any bedroom Jake had ever seen. The walls curved upward into a dome that showed the stars outside. In the center was a large platform that must have been a bed, covered in fabric that looked like liquid silver. But that wasn't what made Jake freeze. Queen Zarathi was there. But she wasn't sitting on a throne or standing tall and powerful. She was slumped in a chair, and the beautiful armor she had worn at dinner was lying in pieces on the floor. Without it, she looked small and weak. Her arms were thin and she was breathing hard, like even sitting was difficult. Around her floated dozens of holographic screens. They showed videos of different alien species, but not war or politics. They showed ordinary life. Families eating together, children playing, people laughing and hugging and doing normal everyday things. The Queen was watching them with an expression Jake had never seen on a Valtorian face before. She looked sad and lonely. Then Jake saw something else. On a table near the window was a small glass box like a terrarium. Inside were plants. Earth plants. He recognized tomatoes, basil, and some flowers his mother used to grow. They were healthy and well cared for. The Queen had been growing earth plants in secret. Jake must have made a sound because suddenly the Queen's head snapped toward him. For a moment they just stared at each other. Her eyes were wide with shock and then with something that looked like fear. Not fear of Jake, but fear of being seen like this, weak and vulnerable. Jake knew he should leave. He should back out of the room and pretend he never saw any of this. But he couldn't move. He kept thinking about that look on her face. The same look he had seen on his grandfather's face when he got sick and didn't want anyone to know. The Queen reached for something on the arm of her chair. Probably a button to call guards. Jake would be arrested or worse. But her hand was shaking so badly she couldn't press it. Without thinking, Jake walked forward. The Queen tensed, watching him like he might attack. But Jake just picked up a piece of the armor from the floor. It was heavier than it looked, made of some kind of metal that felt warm to the touch. He held it out to her and said the only thing he could think of in the moment. His voice was quiet and calm. He told her that he was sorry for walking in without permission. He said he was lost and the door just opened. Then he asked if she wanted help putting the armor back on before anyone else came. The Queen stared at him like he had just spoken in an alien language. Maybe he had. Maybe kindness was alien to her. For a long moment she didn't move. Then slowly she nodded. Jake helped her stand. She was lighter than he expected, like a bird with hollow bones. Together they put the pieces of armor back on. It was complicated with straps and magnetic locks, but Jake was good at figuring out how things worked. When they were done, the Queen looked powerful again. The armor supported her, making her stand tall and strong. She looked at Jake with an expression he couldn't read. Then she spoke. Her voice was quiet, not the strong voice she used in public. She asked him why he helped her. She said anyone else would have used this moment to hurt her or demand something from her. Jake shrugged. He said where he came from, you helped people who needed help. It was that simple. The Queen studied him for a long time. Then she did something that surprised Jake even more than everything else. She smiled. It was small and looked unpracticed, like she hadn't smiled in years. She told Jake that she wanted to talk to him again. She said she had questions about humans, about Earth, about why they did things the way they did. Jake said he wasn't important. He was just a guy who carried papers and fixed things. But the Queen shook her head. She said that was exactly why she wanted to talk to him. Not a politician or a scientist, but a normal human who could tell her the truth. Before Jake could answer, the Queen pressed a button on her armor. A hologram appeared showing a map of the ship. She marked the route back to the human quarters. Then she told him to come back tomorrow night after the formal meetings were done. She would arrange for the guards to let him pass. Jake nodded and headed for the door. As he left, he looked back one more time. The Queen had already turned back to her holographic screens, watching humans live their normal lives. But now she wasn't alone with her loneliness. Something had changed, though Jake wasn't sure what. He made it back to the human quarters and found the data tablet. His boss was relieved and didn't ask why it took so long. That night, lying in his small room on the alien ship, Jake stared at the ceiling and wondered what he had just gotten himself into. He had come to space expecting to be bored and unimportant. Instead, he had accidentally walked into the private world of the most powerful being on the ship, and somehow, impossibly, he had agreed to come back. Jake spent the next day trying to act normal. The trade meetings were long and boring, full of numbers and legal terms he didn't understand. He stood in the back of the room, holding his data tablet and trying not to think about what would happen that evening. Every time he looked at Queen Zarathi on her throne, she seemed like a completely different person from the one he had met in her bedroom. When the meetings finally ended, Jake's boss told him he could have the evening off. The other humans were planning to explore the ship or rest in their quarters. Jake said he wanted to take a walk and learn more about Valtorian culture. It wasn't exactly a lie. Following the map the Queen had given him, Jake made his way through the ship. This time he knew where he was going. When he reached the corridor outside her chambers, 2 guards stood by the door. They were huge, with armor that looked more like weapons than protection. Jake's heart started beating faster, but the guards just looked at him for a moment, then stepped aside. The door opened. Jake walked in, and it closed behind him with a soft sound that made him feel very alone. The Queen was sitting in the same chair as before, but this time she was still wearing her armor. She looked stronger today, more in control. The holographic screens were off. She had been waiting for him. She told Jake to sit. He found a chair that adjusted to his size when he sat down. The silence stretched out between them. Finally, the Queen spoke. She said she wanted to understand something about humans. She asked why Jake had helped her when he could have used her weakness against her. Jake thought about it. He said that on Earth most people helped each other, not because they wanted something in return, but because it was the right thing to do. When someone was hurt or sick or in trouble, you helped them. That was just how humans worked. The Queen said that made no sense. She explained that in Valtorian culture, weakness was death. If someone saw you were weak, they would replace you. Power was everything. Trust was foolish. She asked how humans survived if they wasted time helping the weak instead of removing them. Jake smiled a little. He said that was exactly why humans were strong. Because when times got hard, they had each other. When one person fell, others helped them back up. He said that made humans harder to break than any armor. The Queen was quiet for a long time. Then she asked Jake to tell her about his life on Earth. Not the important things, but the normal things. What did he do every day? What made him happy? What did he care about? So Jake talked. He told her about his small apartment and his job fixing computers. He told her about Sunday dinners with his family, where everyone argued about sports and politics but still loved each other. He told her about his neighbor's dog that always got excited when it saw him. He told her about watching movies and listening to music and going for walks in the park. The Queen listened like she was hearing about another universe. She asked questions about everything. She wanted to know why families lived together when they could be assigned more efficient partnerships. She wanted to know why humans kept pets that served no purpose. She wanted to know why they made art and music when those things didn't help them survive. Jake realized something as he talked. The Valtorians had made themselves perfect, but they had lost something important along the way. They were efficient and powerful, but they had no joy. They had no connection to each other except duty. They had forgotten how to be happy. He said this carefully, not wanting to insult her. But the Queen nodded. She said he was right. Then she told him something that surprised him. She said she had been watching human television broadcasts for years. She had dishes hidden all over her chambers that picked up signals from Earth. She watched shows about human families, human friends, human lives. She watched them try to understand what humans had that Valtorians didn't. Jake asked why. The Queen stood and walked to the window. The stars stretched out forever beyond the glass. She said that Valtorians were dying. Not quickly, but slowly. Every generation was weaker than the last. They had engineered their genetics to be perfect, removing anything they saw as a flaw. But they had removed too much. Now their bodies were breaking down and no one knew how to fix it. She touched her armor, the machine that helped her stand and move. She said she was one of the worst cases, but she wasn't alone. Many Valtorians needed help just to function, but they couldn't admit it because that would show weakness. So they suffered in secret and pretended everything was fine. Jake felt a rush of understanding. That was why she watched humans. Humans weren't perfect. They got sick and made mistakes and weren't very efficient, but they kept going anyway. They found ways to be happy even when things were hard. Maybe that was what the Valtorians needed to learn. He said this to the Queen and she turned to look at him. She said that was exactly why she wanted the alliance with Earth. Not just for trade, but to learn from humans, to remember what her people had forgotten. But she said there was a problem. Many Valtorians didn't want to learn from humans. They thought humans were primitive and weak. They thought accepting help from humans would be shameful. The Queen said there was one Valtorian in particular who was dangerous. General Croven. He was powerful, ambitious, and he believed Valtorians should conquer other species, not learn from them. He was looking for any excuse to challenge her rule. If he found out about her illness or about these meetings with Jake, he would use it against her. Jake asked why she was taking such a risk then. Why talk to him when it could cost her everything? The Queen smiled that small, unpracticed smile again. She said because she was tired of being alone. She was tired of pretending to be strong when she was falling apart. She was tired of leading a civilization that had forgotten how to live. For the first time in her life, someone had shown her kindness without wanting anything in return. That was worth any risk. They talked for hours that night. The Queen asked about Earth and Jake told her everything he could. He talked about music and movies and books. He talked about friendship and love and family. He talked about failure and second chances and learning from mistakes. Things that meant nothing in Valtorian culture but were everything to humans. At one point, Jake told her a joke he had heard from his brother. It was a stupid joke, the kind that made people groan more than laugh. But the Queen laughed. It was a short surprise sound like she had forgotten how. Then she laughed again, longer this time. She said she had never laughed before. She didn't even know Valtorians could. When it was time for Jake to leave, the Queen stopped him at the door. She said she had a proposal. She wanted Jake to be her cultural advisor. Officially, his job would be to help her understand human negotiation tactics. Really, she wanted him to teach her how to be more human, how to feel things, how to connect with others, how to remember what life was supposed to be. Jake said he wasn't qualified for that. He was just a regular guy. But the Queen said that was the point. She didn't want a scientist or a diplomat. She wanted someone real, someone who understood that life was about more than power and efficiency. Also said she would make sure the trade deal favored Earth. She would give Jake protection and access to parts of the ship humans had never seen. In return, all he had to do was talk to her, share his world with her, help her understand what it meant to be human. Jake should have said no. This was way above his level. He should tell his boss and let the real diplomats handle it. But he thought about the Queen sitting alone in her room, watching human families on her screens and growing earth plants in secret. He thought about an entire civilization that had forgotten how to be happy. He said yes. Over the next few weeks, Jake met with the Queen almost every night. During the day, he attended meetings and did his normal job. No one seemed to notice that he had become the Queen's special advisor. The Valtorians didn't care about humans enough to pay attention to what they did, but someone was paying attention. In the shadows of the great ship, General Croven watched and waited. He saw the human who kept visiting the Queen's chambers. He saw how she seemed different lately, less cold and distant. He didn't know what was happening, but he knew weakness when he saw it, and weakness in Valtorian culture was an opportunity. Jake didn't know he was being watched. He was too busy trying to teach an alien queen how to be human. It was the strangest job he had ever had, and somehow it felt like the most important thing he had ever done. 3 weeks had passed since Jake started meeting with Queen Zarathi. The trade negotiations were going well, better than anyone expected. The Queen was being generous with Earth, offering technology and resources that made the human diplomats very happy. But Jake knew the real reason. She was keeping her promise to him. Their meetings had become the best part of his day. He would finish his work, wait for the ship to grow quiet, then make his way to her chambers. The guards knew him now and always let him pass. Inside, he and the Queen would talk for hours about everything and nothing. He taught her about human culture. He showed her music on his tablet, everything from classical to rock and roll. She loved music. She said Valtorians had sounds they called music, but it was just mathematical patterns. Human music had emotion in it, something that touched feelings she didn't know she had. He told her about movies and books, about stories where heroes failed and got back up, where love was more important than power, where the weak sometimes won through courage and cleverness. The Queen listened to every word like it was precious. In return, she taught him about Valtorian history. Once long ago, they had been different. The ancient records showed Valtorians who laughed and cried and created art for beauty instead of function. But over thousands of years, they had changed themselves. They removed the genes for strong emotions, thinking feelings made them weak. They designed perfect bodies and perfect minds. They became the most powerful civilization in the galaxy. But perfection had a price. Without genetic diversity, without the chaos of natural evolution, they became fragile. Diseases that would have affected only some of them now affected everyone. Their bodies were breaking down, and they didn't know how to fix it because they had forgotten how to adapt. The Queen showed Jake secret medical reports. The genetic degradation was getting worse each generation. In 100 years, maybe 200, the Valtorians would be extinct. They were dying because they had made themselves too perfect to survive. Jake asked why they didn't just accept help. Humans had good doctors and scientists. Maybe together they could find a cure. But the Queen shook her head. Pride, she said. Valtorians would rather die than admit they needed help from a younger, weaker species. Most of them didn't even believe the problem was serious. They thought science would save them eventually, just like it always had. One night, Jake brought something special. He had asked his family to send him seeds from their garden. When he showed them to the Queen, her eyes lit up. They spent the evening planting them in her terrarium, getting dirt under their fingernails and laughing when they couldn't figure out the instructions. It was the most normal, human thing Jake had done since arriving on the ship, and it felt wonderful. But outside the Queen's chambers, danger was growing. General Croven had been watching Jake for weeks. He had his people follow the human, record his movements, and investigate his background. What he found made him suspicious. Why would the Queen spend so much time with an unimportant human? There had to be a reason. Croven decided to take action. He couldn't enter the Queen's chambers without permission, but he could watch what came and went. He installed hidden cameras in the corridor. He bribed one of the guards to tell him what he heard. Slowly, he began to piece together the truth. The queen was sick. The armor she wore wasn't just ceremonial. It was holding her up, helping her move. Without it, she could barely stand. This was the weakness Croven had been waiting for. With this information, he could challenge her rule. He could become king. And once he was in power, he would end this foolish alliance with humans. He would conquer Earth instead, taking what the Valtorians needed by force. But Croven was smart. He didn't act right away. He waited for the perfect moment. The final trade ceremony was coming in 3 days. All the important Valtorians would be there, along with the human delegation. It would be the perfect stage to reveal the queen's weakness and demand her throne. Jake didn't know about any of this. He was too happy to notice the danger. For the first time in his life, he felt like he was doing something important. He wasn't just fixing computers or carrying papers. He was helping someone. He was making a difference. One evening, the queen told him something that made his heart skip. She said that after the ceremony, she wanted to visit Earth. She wanted to see the planet she had been watching for so long. She wanted to walk under the real sky, feel real rain, meet real humans living their normal lives. She said Jake had given her hope that the Valtorians could change, could remember what they had lost. But first, she needed to see it with her own eyes. Jake was excited. He started planning where they would go. He would take her to his hometown, introduce her to his family, show her all the normal, beautiful things about human life. It would be amazing. The next night, Jake noticed something odd. The guard at the queen's door was different, someone he hadn't seen before. The guard watched him with cold eyes as he passed. Inside, the queen seemed worried. She said she had heard rumors. Some of the court members were questioning the alliance. They were asking why she was being so generous to Earth. They were asking questions about her health. Jake felt fear creep into his chest. He asked if she was in danger. The queen said she didn't know, but she said that if something happened, if things went wrong at the ceremony, Jake needed to get the other humans and leave the ship immediately. He needed to warn Earth. Some Valtorians wanted war, not peace. Jake said he wouldn't leave her. They were friends now, and friends didn't abandon each other. The queen looked at him with something like wonder. She said that was the most human thing he had ever said. In Valtorian culture, there were no friends, only allies who might betray you. The idea of loyalty without benefit was strange and wonderful to her. She made Jake promise that if things went bad, he would save himself and the other humans. He didn't want to promise, but she insisted. Finally, he agreed, but he was already thinking of ways around that promise. The day of the ceremony arrived. Jake put on his best suit and joined the other humans in the Great Hall. The room was enormous, with a ceiling that showed the stars and walls that glowed with soft light. Hundreds of Valtorians filled the space, all wearing elaborate armor and looking cold and perfect. Queen Zarathi entered last, and everyone bowed. She walked to her throne with perfect grace. Jake could see the strain in her eyes, but no one else would notice. She looked powerful and in control. The ceremony began. The queen spoke about the alliance between Valtorians and humans. She talked about trade and cooperation and mutual benefit. The human ambassador responded with thanks and promises. Everything was going perfectly. Then General Croven stood up. The room went silent. He said he had something important to share with the court. He said the queen had been hiding a terrible secret, one that affected all Valtorians. He said she was sick, that her body was failing, that she needed machines just to stand. He said she was weak and unfit to rule. The room exploded with noise. Valtorians were standing, shouting, demanding answers. The human delegation looked confused and worried. Jake felt his stomach drop. This was it. This was the danger the queen had feared. Croven continued. He showed medical records he had stolen. He showed videos of the queen struggling without her armor. He said she had been meeting secretly with a human, that she had been compromised, that she was unfit to lead. He said Valtorians needed a strong leader, not someone who relied on machines and took advice from primitive aliens. Then he did something that made Jake's blood run cold. He challenged the queen to ritual combat. In Valtorian law, anyone could challenge the ruler if they could prove weakness. The combat would be to the death. The winner would become the new ruler. The queen stood slowly. Jake could see she was thinking fast. She could accept the challenge, but she would lose. She couldn't fight in her condition. She could refuse, but that would prove Kroven right and she would have to give up her throne. Either way, he had won. But Jake wasn't going to let his friend lose without a fight. He had an idea. It was crazy and might not work, but it was the only chance they had. He stood up and every eye in the room turned to him. He said he had something to say about General Kroven's accusations, and what he said next would change everything. Every Valtorian in the room stared at Jake. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest. His boss was making frantic hand signals telling him to sit down and be quiet. But Jake ignored him. He walked to the center of the room, standing between the Queen and General Kroven. Jake spoke clearly, his voice carrying through the huge hall. He said General Kroven was right about one thing. The Queen was sick, but he was wrong about what that meant. He said the Queen's illness wasn't a sign of her weakness. It was a sign of a much bigger problem, one that affected all Valtorians, not just the Queen. The room erupted in angry voices. How dare a human speak about Valtorian matters? Who did he think he was? But Queen Zarathi raised her hand and the room fell silent. She told them to let Jake speak. She said he had earned that right. Jake continued. He explained what the Queen had taught him about Valtorian history, how they had engineered themselves to be perfect, how they had removed anything they thought was a weakness, how that perfection was now killing them. He pulled up data on his tablet and projected it for everyone to see. Medical records showing the genetic degradation, statistics showing how each generation was weaker than the last. He said the Valtorians were dying because they had made themselves too perfect to adapt. Evolution needed variety, needed imperfection, needed chaos. Without it, species became fragile. Humans understood this. Humans were messy and imperfect and full of genetic variety. That was why they were strong. Then Jake said something that made the room go completely silent. He said that human doctors had been studying the Valtorian genetic data, and they had found something. A possible treatment. Not a complete cure, but a way to reverse some of the degradation, a way to make Valtorians stronger again. But there was a catch. The treatment involved introducing genetic diversity back into Valtorian DNA. It would make them slightly less perfect by their old standards, but it would make them healthy. It would let them survive. The question was whether Valtorians could accept being less perfect if it meant staying alive. General Kroven laughed. He said this was exactly what he had warned about. Humans wanted to contaminate Valtorian genetics to make them weak like humans. He said accepting this treatment would be the end of everything that made Valtorians great. Jake turned to face him. He said that Kroven wasn't trying to protect Valtorian greatness. He was trying to protect his own power. Then Jake revealed something that made everyone gasp. He had spent weeks on the ship watching and learning. He had noticed things. He had talked to scientists and doctors who worked in secret, afraid of being punished for their research. Jake pulled up more data. Files he had gathered from various sources on the ship. They showed that Kroven had been sabotaging medical research for years. Any scientist who got close to a cure had their funding cut or their lab shut down. Any doctor who suggested accepting help from other species was dismissed. Kroven wanted the genetic crisis to get worse because chaos gave him opportunities for power. The room exploded again. Valtorians were shouting at Kroven, demanding explanations. He tried to deny it, but Jake had evidence. Documents with Kroven's authorization codes, messages between him and his supporters. Plans to use the crisis to take control of the government. Queen Zarathi stood. Her voice was strong, amplified by her armor. She said Kroven was guilty of treason. He had put his ambition above the survival of their entire species. She ordered him arrested, but Kroven wasn't finished. He activated his own armor's weapon system. Suddenly he was armed and dangerous. His supporters, about 20 soldiers, did the same. They spread out around the room, weapons pointed at anyone who might try to stop them. Kroven said if he couldn't rule through law, he would rule through force. He gave everyone a choice. Support him or die. He said the weak age of cooperation was over. The Valtorians would return to their true nature as conquerors. They would take what they needed from other species, starting with Earth. The human delegation looked terrified. They were unarmed and helpless. The loyal Valtorian guards moved to protect the Queen, but they were outnumbered. It looked like Kroven had won after all, but Jake wasn't ready to give up. He had spent weeks learning about the ship's systems. He knew things that Kroven didn't think were important. He knew about the maintenance tunnels and service corridors. He knew about the backup systems and emergency protocols. He knew that the Valtorians' perfect organization had weaknesses that came from being too rigid, too predictable. While Croven was making his speech, Jake was typing on his tablet. He was accessing systems that no one thought to guard because they seemed unimportant. Environmental controls, lighting systems, door locks. The Valtorians had made everything computer-controlled for efficiency. That efficiency was about to work against them. Jake hit enter. Suddenly, all the lights in the Great Hall went out. At the same moment, a dozen emergency doors slammed shut, dividing Croven's forces. The soldiers couldn't see each other or coordinate. In the darkness and confusion, the loyal guards moved in. But some of Croven's soldiers were near the human delegation. Jake heard weapons charging in the dark. He didn't think. He just acted. He grabbed the nearest human and pulled them toward where he remembered seeing a door. Other humans followed his voice. He found the door panel by feel and managed to get it open. They ran through corridors that Jake had memorized during his weeks on the ship. Behind them, they could hear fighting. Energy weapons flashed in the darkness. The other humans followed Jake because he seemed to know where he was going. His boss kept asking what the plan was. Jake admitted he didn't have one beyond getting everyone to safety. They reached the docking bay where the human shuttle was kept. But there were guards there loyal to Croven. They blocked the way to the shuttle, weapons ready. The humans were trapped, Jake thought fast. He couldn't fight the guards. But maybe he didn't have to. He stepped forward and spoke to them. He said the coup was failing. General Croven was being arrested. They could put down their weapons and say they were following orders, or they could be tried for treason along with him. Their choice. The guards looked at each other. They were young, probably assigned to guard duty because it was boring and unimportant. They hadn't signed up for a civil war. One of them lowered his weapon. Then another. Finally, they all stood down. But Jake didn't take the humans to the shuttle. Instead, he asked the guards to help him with something. He explained quickly what he needed. The guards listened, then nodded. They understood. Together, humans and Valtorians started working on a plan. Back in the Great Hall, the lights came back on. Most of Croven's soldiers had been captured, but the general himself had taken hostages, including several important Valtorian nobles. He was holding them at weapon point, demanding a ship and safe passage. The Queen couldn't stop him without getting the hostages killed. Then every screen in the room lit up. Jake's face appeared, transmitted from the docking bay. He started speaking, but not to Croven or the Queen. He spoke to all the Valtorians watching, especially the younger ones. He showed them videos he had recorded over the past weeks. Young Valtorians who had started talking to humans. He showed them laughing at human jokes. He showed them creating art just for fun. He showed them expressing opinions and preferences and feelings. He showed them being individuals instead of perfect soldiers. Jake said that General Croven wanted to go back to the old ways. A society where everyone was the same, where weakness meant death, where power was everything. But the young Valtorians Jake had met didn't want that. They had tasted something different. They had discovered that life could be about more than duty and efficiency. He asked them to choose. They could follow Croven into endless conquest and slow extinction, or they could try something new. They could accept help. They could accept imperfection. They could learn to live instead of just survive. In the Great Hall, young Valtorian soldiers started lowering their weapons. They had been watching Jake's transmission. Many of them were the same ones who had started talking to humans, who had begun to change. They didn't want to fight for Croven anymore. Even some of Croven's older supporters hesitated. They had families who were sick, children who might not survive to adulthood. The genetic crisis was real, and Croven's promises of strength through conquest wouldn't cure it. Maybe the humans really could help. Croven found himself alone. His hostages carefully moved away from him. He was surrounded by guards who no longer supported him. His coup had failed, defeated not by superior force but by a simple human appealing to what Valtorians had forgotten they could be. The general was arrested. His supporters surrendered. The crisis was over. Queen Zarathi remained on her throne, but everything had changed. The secret was out. Everyone knew about the genetic degradation. Everyone knew the Queen was sick. Everyone knew that the Valtorians needed help, and thanks to Jake, everyone also knew that accepting help wasn't weakness. It was wisdom. The age of conquest was over. The age of cooperation was beginning. But there was still much work to do. 2 months had passed since the failed coup. The Valtorian ship looked different now. There were humans everywhere working alongside Valtorians, scientists, doctors, engineers, and teachers. Even some families had come, showing Valtorians what human life really looked like. Jake stood in what used to be a cold, empty conference room. Now it had comfortable chairs, plants in the corners, and pictures on the walls, human pictures and Valtorian art side by side. It was becoming a real community space where both species could meet and talk. The medical progress was the most exciting part. Human and Valtorian doctors working together had refined the genetic treatment. Queen Zarathi had been the first to receive it. Jake watched as she slowly got stronger. Now she could walk without her armor for short periods. She would never be as strong as a healthy human, but she was better than she had been in years. Other Valtorians were starting to take the treatment too. At first, only a few brave ones. But when they saw the results, more came forward. It wasn't easy for them to accept. Taking the treatment meant admitting they weren't perfect, but it also meant having a future. The cultural changes were slower, but just as important. Jake had been made the official ambassador, much to his surprise. He never wanted to be important, but here he was helping to bridge two completely different civilizations. His real job, though, was simpler than that. He organized dinners where humans and Valtorians ate together. He set up movie nights showing human films. He arranged for human families to host young Valtorians, teaching them about life beyond duty and efficiency. One of his favorite success stories was a young Valtorian named Vel. She had been assigned to military service like her parents and grandparents before her. But after spending time with humans, she discovered she loved painting. She had natural talent, creating beautiful art that mixed Valtorian precision with human emotion. Now she was teaching art classes, something that would have been unthinkable before the Alliance. There were problems too. Some Valtorians still believed the old ways were better. They had left the ship to form their own colony, determined to maintain pure Valtorian culture. The Queen let them go. She said everyone deserved the right to choose their own path, even if she disagreed with it. Other alien species had heard about the Alliance. Ships from across the galaxy started arriving, wanting to learn more. Some wanted trade agreements. Others wanted cultural exchanges. But all of them were curious about humans. How had this young species managed to change the mighty Valtorians? Jake tried to explain it in meeting after meeting. Humans weren't special because they were strong or smart or technologically advanced. They were special because they remembered how to connect with each other. They valued kindness and cooperation. They understood that survival wasn't just about being the strongest, but about being able to adapt and work together. One evening, Queen Zarathi invited Jake to her chambers for dinner. It had become a regular thing. They would eat simple food, usually something Jake taught the kitchen staff to make. Tonight it was pasta, which the Queen loved even though she couldn't pronounce the name correctly. As they ate, the Queen told Jake about a decision she had made. She was going to step down from the throne. Not because she was weak or forced to, but because she wanted to. She said the Valtorians needed a new kind of leader, someone who understood both the old ways and the new. She was recommending a council instead of a single ruler, with both Valtorians and humans on it. Jake was shocked. He asked what she would do instead. The Queen smiled, that smile that came so easily to her now. She said she wanted to be a teacher. She wanted to help young Valtorians learn what she had learned, to show them that there was more to life than duty. She wanted to help build the future instead of just ruling it. She also said she was finally going to visit Earth. Jake had promised to show her his world, and she was holding him to that promise. Jake laughed and said he would be happy to. They could visit his hometown, meet his family, see the ocean. All the normal, wonderful things he had told her about. A few weeks later, Jake and the Queen stood in a field outside his hometown. It was spring and everything was green and growing. The Queen breathed in the fresh air and looked around with wonder. She had seen Earth from space many times, but being here, feeling the ground under her feet and the sun on her face, was completely different. Jake's family was nervous about meeting an alien queen, but she put them at ease immediately. She was curious about everything. She helped his mother cook dinner, learning to chop vegetables and stir pots. She played with his nieces and nephews, letting them show her their toys and teaching her their games. She sat with his grandfather and listened to his stories about the old days that night. Sitting on the porch with Jake's family, The Queen said something that made Jake realize how far they had all come. She said that Valtorians used to think emotions were a weakness, that caring about others made you vulnerable. But she understood now. Emotions weren't weakness. They were what made life worth living. Without them, you were just existing. Not really alive. She said humans had given the Valtorians something they didn't know they needed. Not technology or medicine, though those were important. They had given them hope. Hope that things could be better. Hope that change was possible. Hope that they could learn to live instead of just survive. A year after the coup, Jake was invited to speak at the opening of the new academy on the Valtorian ship. It was a school where young humans and Valtorians would learn together. Other species had asked to send students too. It was becoming a place where the galaxy's children could learn from each other. Jake stood in front of the first class of students. There were humans, Valtorians, and half a dozen other species. They all looked excited and nervous, like kids on their first day of school anywhere in the universe. He told them about the importance of what they were doing. He said they were the first generation that would grow up knowing multiple cultures, learning multiple ways of thinking. They would be the bridge between species. They would build a galaxy where cooperation was stronger than conquest, where diversity was valued, where different didn't mean enemy. After his speech, Queen Zarathi, now officially Teacher Zarathi, gave the students their first assignment. She told them to talk to someone from a different species and learn about their home, not the big important things, but the small things. What did they eat for breakfast? What games did they play? What made them laugh? Jake watched as the students nervously started talking to each other. It reminded him of his first awkward conversation with the Queen in her chambers. That felt like a lifetime ago now. So much had changed. He had changed. The Valtorians had changed. Maybe the whole galaxy was starting to change that evening. Jake stood at his favorite window on the ship, the one that showed Earth in the distance. It was just a small blue dot from here, one planet among billions. But it was home, and somehow, a regular guy from that small blue planet had helped change the galaxy. Zarathi joined him at the window. They stood in comfortable silence for a while. Something else she had learned from humans. The value of quiet friendship, of being together without needing to fill every moment with words. Finally, she spoke. She thanked Jake for everything he had done, for helping her when he didn't have to, for showing her people a different way, for giving them a future. Jake shook his head. He said he was just a guy who got lost and walked through the wrong door. Everything that happened after was because she had the courage to change. She could have had him arrested that first night. Instead, she chose to trust him. That was the real beginning of everything. Zarathi smiled. She said that maybe some doors were meant to be walked through even by accident. Maybe some meetings were meant to happen. She didn't believe in destiny, but she believed in choices. And the choice to help each other, to learn from each other, to grow together. That was the most important choice anyone could make. Down in the academy, young students from a dozen different worlds were starting to become friends. They were learning that their differences made them stronger, not weaker. They were learning that cooperation was better than competition. They were learning what humans had always known, that together they could face anything. The Valtorians had spent thousands of years trying to be perfect. They had removed their flaws, engineered themselves to be superior, built a civilization on strength and efficiency. And it had nearly destroyed them. Humans had stayed imperfect. They were messy and emotional and unpredictable. They made mistakes and learned from them. They cared about each other even when it wasn't efficient. They found joy in simple things, and that had made them resilient. Now together, they were building something new. Not perfect, but real. Not efficient, but meaningful. Not powerful, but lasting. Jake thought about the night he accidentally walked into the Queen's bedroom. He had been scared and confused, just trying not to cause any trouble. He had expected to spend his time in space filing papers and staying out of the way. Instead, he had helped start a revolution. Not a revolution of weapons or politics, but a revolution of the heart. He had shown the Valtorians something they had forgotten, that the things they thought were weaknesses, emotions and connections and imperfections, were actually strengths. That being human wasn't about being perfect. It was about being alive.